Well, it happened, and I'm actually really excited about this. I'm not even gonna lie. So for those who don't know, and I should have made this video yesterday, but unfortunately I was in the ER with my girlfriend who needed medical attention. So yeah, sorry, card games did not take priority that day. That day was a day that needed to be completely prioritized towards my partner. But now that we are back home, let's go ahead and talk about what happened yesterday. And that is that the Rules Committee decided that a couple of cards needed to be banned in Commander recently. Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, Dockside Extortionist, and of course, Nadu. Let's go over the reasons that they gave for each, and then let's give some context. To the Rules Committee, Mana Crypt came down for no mana on turn 1. It was quite possibly one of the most explosive starts ever, was doing Mana Crypt into a Signet or a Talisman or a land and then another Signet, leaving that player untapping for 5 mana on turn 2. In games going over 12 turns, the accumulated threat of damage from Mana Crypt was a reasonable counterbalance, but when you are snowballing to a turn 6 or 8 win, that is a meaningless drawback. It means nothing. And then for Jeweled Lotus, they mentioned that this was a card that gave you 5 mana on turn 2. Jeweled Lotus does it without even needing a good hand, though you are restricted to what you can do with that mana, but commanders pack a significant punch nowadays, often drawing cards to make up for the one shot of mana and have huge defensive abilities that can't be interacted with early on in the game. Dockside is noted as not being as explosive in the early game as the other two, but it still goes very mana positive. It also goes infinite with a hand sandwich, so there's all kinds of ways to abuse the Dockside, and of course, Nadu is Nadu. I don't want to do another video talking about Nadu Winged Wisdom and all of the ways in which this card is busted and broken and should never have been designed in the first place. So let's talk about each and every one of these and how I feel. I've made videos about Mana Crypt before, multiple in fact. I've made a video about specifically Mana Crypt being too fast for casual Commander, and I've made videos about fun versus competitive Magic, and how there is a distinction between those two based on what your primary goal is. If your primary goal is to treat the game as a, communing of friends, or if you're treating the game as a competition with a race to the finish line. And depending on which one you care about more, that will color the kinds of cards that you put into your deck. Now, I'll also say that Mana Crypt is a card that belongs in CEDH. It is a defining piece of CEDH tech, and the fact that CEDH does not have its own exclusive ban list, this is now an example of why there needs to be one. I feel like if the Rules Committee was going to have this card banned as much as I think it should have been banned, this kind of necessitates a second ban list. This necessitates CEDH having its own thing. And I've seen a bunch of people try to say that CEDH and EDH, there's not much of a distinction between the two. No, if you've played at one table, you know the difference between how those two games play. It feels completely different playing on one versus playing in another, and this is not something that I think people can really argue in good faith. CEDH and EDH are effectively two different formats now. They've been two different formats for a long time. The play expectations between the two of them are very, very different. I have seen some content creators mention that technically EDH is the modification of the format because CEDH is the purest form of the format where you can play anything. I disagree with that entirely because the ethos of Commander when it was designed was to have something fun and casual that you could play on the side at tournament events. You had your competitive event, and then you had this as the thing that judges would play to kind of see how far they could push certain rules interactions in a way that just did not happen in a regular game of Commander. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that the casual side of EDH has been the spirit of the format for the longest time. This is reflected in the precons that are built for it. This is reflected in the made for Commander staples that are made for it, and this is reflected in how the format has changed. There was a small bubble, there was a small window where Commander became more competitive in the cards that were released for it. This can be seen in cards like Fierce Guardianship that came out and Dockside Extortionist, which of course is now banned. These were cards that were thrown into precons that were otherwise only kind of okay, but had these incredibly powerful one-shot pieces of adrenaline that were ridiculously overpowered for the decks they were in. And over time, Commander design for made for Commander cards has lessened. The amount of juice that is pumped into cards no longer looks like Dockside Extortionists and Fierce Guardianships. We don't get cards like that anymore. Sometimes mistakes happen, like Nadu Winged Wisdom and Hull Breacher, but again, this is not the norm now. These are now anomalies as opposed to the expected thing that we get anytime a new set of precons comes out or a made for Commander product comes out. So I think Wizards of the Coast recognized that casual Commander was pushing the format more than anything, and building cards for casual players made infinitely more sense. You can put all the power in a Modern Horizons set because that is a competitive format. You can put all the power in a Standard set based on what's around in Standard. It is a competitive format. That's not really how Commander is. So that brings us to the cards that have been taken out. Like I mentioned, Dockside Extortionist is gone. I'm okay with that. There is never a game that I have played that felt like it was significantly improved by a Dockside Extortionist. And I think that's going to be the running theme for each of these cards. If we get Nadu out of the way real quick, Nadu games never felt fun. If you were not the Nadu player, watching the Nadu player go through a non-deterministic loop for sometimes 20 minutes just to get their deck pushing through its line is a painful experience. I can tell you that I had the experience of watching a friend of mine on very little sleep try to pilot his Nadu deck in the middle of a Commander tournament, and I had to tell him the lines to go through, not because I wanted to backseat game, but because I wanted the game to be over more quickly. So I literally just flat out asked, do you have a Zendikar's Royal, or a Rampaging Bailiffs, or a Scoot Swarm in your hand yet? Okay, cool. Now that you have Lightning Greaves, just say you won. We will all agree with you. There will be no questions asked. You definitely won at this point. And I think that's been the experience of anybody who's played at a game with Nadu. The only people that I've seen not complain about Nadu are people who exclusively play CEDH and maybe have one casual deck. And again, this is where I think that a distinction in formats needs to be made. But Nadu is also not a great CEDH card either. Not that it isn't super powerful, it is, but it runs into a problem that CEDH tournaments are always ran on timers, and Nadu is not a timer-friendly card in any way, shape, or form. Nadu is a time monopolizer, which is antithetical to the speed of CEDH. So it really doesn't belong in either format, even though it has more of a home in CEDH. But now we run into the Dockside, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and each of these I'm okay going away. Jeweled Lotus felt like, from its very conception, it felt like a way to try to bring Black Lotus into a format that already had Black Lotus banned, and for many good reasons. One, the card is obscenely powerful, and two, the card is almost impossible, right? Like, nobody's bringing a Black Lotus to a Commander game. Nobody's doing that, even if the card is legal outside of proxying. If you notice, though, each card that had been banned off this list is $100 plus. Jeweled Lotus is routinely an $80 to $100 card. Mana Crypt is routinely a $100 to $200 card, and Dockside Extortionist is routinely $50 to $100. These cards, the longer they are not reprinted, are always ridiculously expensive. But Wizards of the Coast, being the company that they are, that is made of greed, basically only ever prints these as chase cards. Dockside got to be in a precon once, and then he got booted up to Mythic Rarity and put into a booster pack later because they realized how much people wanted Dockside Extortionist. Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt both got extra special printings in recent sets to be chase cards for those sets. And this creates a bit of a paradox, where you have Commander, which is the casual format, but you have to pay the equivalent of a brand new video game console to afford all of the shiny pieces required to make the format run. There are certain cards like Dual Lands which have things that can operate identically to them. A Shock Land operates identically to a Dual Land in 99.9% of scenarios, and we have such a density of other cards that fulfill the roles of Dual Lands. We have the new Surveil Lands that came out that can serve the purpose of being Dual Lands in your deck that are fetchable. We have the Bicycle Lands that are fetchable, the Tango Lands that are fetchable, and then of course we have the Dominaria and Kaldheim duels, which are all fetchable. And in the event that you're fetching with something like a Farseek, all of these operate completely identically to one another in that they are forced to come into play tapped anyway. So we have analogs. Not as powerful analogs, but we have analogs for the Dual Lands that serve every purpose that they serve. We do not have any analogs for Mana Crypt outside of Sol Ring. And I think that's where we need to have another conversation. There is a point in this post where they mention Sol Ring specifically. They said we need to talk about the elephant in the room. We're not banning Sol Ring and have no desire to. Yes, based on the criteria we've talked about before, it would be banned. Sol Ring is the iconic card of the format, and it's sufficiently tied to the identity of the format, and that it defies the laws of physics in a way that no other card does. Banning Sol Ring would fundamentally change the identity of the format. We aren't trying to eliminate explosive starts. It happens every once in a while, which is exciting. Removing the other 3 cards geometrically reduces the number of hands capable of a substantial above curve mana generation in the first few turns. And here's where I think a lot of people haven't really understood what the rules committee did here. Because I've seen all kinds of people complain about why ban Mana Crypt if you're not going to ban Sol Ring. I just have to say, every single one of you, stop being a binary thinker. Stop. There is a world where you can do something called harm reduction, and it is not harm elimination, but it is still good. I'm not trying to say Mana Crypt is a harmful card. I mean, I am saying that, but not in this context. What I'm saying is, as an example, if you get shot with a bullet, it is an improvement to your scenario for the bullet to be removed from your body. You may not be healed yet, the trauma may not be eliminated, but removing the bullet is in fact a net positive to how you are feeling with the bullet in you. It is not a perfect scenario, we can't unshoot you, but the bullet is removed. Mana Crypt is the same way, in my opinion, when you look at things like Sol Ring. Yes, I think the format would be better without Sol Ring, and without Mana Crypt, but if you have to eliminate one, let's go ahead and eliminate the one that people are not able to afford. Nobody in this economy is able to afford a Mana Crypt in a reasonable click. And if you are able to afford a Mana Crypt, then I am happy that you are privileged enough to afford that. I am not begrudging you for being privileged enough to be able to afford that. I am happy that you have a better financial scenario than 99% of everybody else in, say, the United States. However, it is a card that is cost prohibitive for everyone. So having the card be ridiculously expensive and also having the card be the best at what it does was never a good idea. If a card is going to be ridiculously expensive, it should be based on the card being rare but obtainable. So Sol Ring, I am more okay with between the two because everybody can obtain one. There are versions of Sol Ring that cost hundreds of dollars, and these are chased at the same rate as cards like Mana Crypt. But unlike the Mana Crypt, these are not necessary includes to make your deck function. The functionality of a deck is greatly improved once a Mana Crypt is shoved in it, compared to a deck that has just the Sol Ring. If your deck has both, that is twice the likelihood that your deck is going to have that explosive start. Even more if you've got other cards that can be cast on turn 1 to make this density even higher. Like Moxen, as an example, which I've seen people complain about those as well, saying that the Moxen should definitely stay. I am of the opinion that Moxen are less harmful than Mana Crypt, so they at least have downsides that matter. Imprint is a downside that matters compared to Mana Crypt. Discarding a card out of your hand, discarding a land is a downside that matters compared to Mana Crypt, which just asks you to roll a die, and sometimes you would lose life and sometimes you wouldn't. So, while I do think Sol Ring should be gone and should not be in the format anymore, I understand why it's not. the logistics of getting rid of Sol Ring would not be enough to justify removing it out of the game in the eyes of the rules committee. I disagree with that opinion. I think that it should just be gone anyway, but you understand where I'm coming from here. It is a card that is tied to the identity of the format, irrespective of how harmful it may be to the format as a whole. And the format has been growing exponentially despite the existence of Sol Ring in every person's deck. So it's very hard to calculate how much damage it actually causes. But when we look at cards like Dockside Extortionist and Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, anytime somebody drops those at a game where somebody is starting out with a precon, they can often feel like they're being priced out of their game. It's one of the reasons why I made my channel the way I did, where I build decks that are within everybody's budget. This is because I do not like that feeling when it happens to me, and I don't like that feeling when it happens to other people. And I want to alleviate that feeling for basically every player. But here's where I need to move away from my own opinions. I personally think this is a net good for the game. This is the biggest ban list announcement we've ever had in Commander outside of the inception of the format. I think this is a fundamentally good thing. However, we do need to look at how the community has responded to these. Now, I have cropped away the names and everything from people who have made these posts on Twitter. This is because I don't want anybody going after them or fighting them. But if you are the one who made this post and you're watching my video, I hope you do find my arguments in good faith. This one I found interesting. The casuals really cried the hardest SMH. Now, this one's interesting to me for one reason. Commander is a casual format. Compared to 1v1 Modern, 1v1 Legacy, 1v1 any format, really, and especially CEDH, which is the niche within Commander, 95% of the people who are playing Commander are playing Kitchen Table Commander. They are playing casual Commander. They are playing the format closer to Monopoly and further away from high ELO chess. That is how it is seen by most of the players. And when you get your friends into Commander, most of the time you're not getting them in on the merits of CEDH, you're getting them in on the merits of being able to get a cool precon that does a neat thing. That's how people get into Commander most of the time. As much as we want to be elitist and do this whole, the casuals really ruined it for everybody. No, that's not what happens. There's a different scenario that happens. The people who get their game ruined are the casual people who want to play the game at a certain power level, and other people basically refuse to let them play at a slower or mid power level. If everybody in a group is playing as fast as possible, except for you, you will always have less fun. You will never be able to have fun because you will never be able to play your game unless you speed up. If everybody slows down a little bit, which is far easier to do because it doesn't require a monetary investment to slow down a deck, everybody has more fun. There can be a conversation about how Rule 0 had an effect on this to begin with. You could just Rule 0 out Dockside and Rule 0 out Mana Crypt. But I'm here to tell you that doesn't actually work. The reasons it doesn't work is nobody can agree on what fair Rule 0 conversations are. The only people who think Rule 0 actually works in this game are the people who have a consistent play group to play around. But if you, like me, travel a lot and you play at multiple different areas with multiple different ideas of deck power level, then you're not going to have the same Rule 0 conversations. There will be different expectations. I can tell you that from my experience, the store that I play at plays at a higher power level than a lot of other stores that I've been to. And this is because we have a CEDH scene and a casual Commander scene and a separate beginner Commander scene, and everybody gets segmented into one of these areas for tournament play. This allows people to have higher power Commander games in the tournament while still not quite being to the level of CEDH. This causes people to have stronger decks, and as a result, people slip in a Mana Crypt and then get blown out by a single big board removal, and then life gets really funny for them. You can say the casuals are the ones who were crying the hardest, but as somebody who has traveled the country, going to multiple different card shops in multiple different cities, I can tell you that casual is the flavor of Commander. This is not a unique phenomenon to where I live and play, higher power casual as it may be. If I go a little north to a different card shop, or if I go down to Florida, or if I go back up to New York, or if I go into Pennsylvania, every one of these places has a similarly casual meta. However, the only thing that doesn't get agreed on in every one of these metas is which power cards are more problematic. And this is where things like Mana Crypt come in. People will say, oh, Mana Crypt's fine because I have access to Sol Ring. But again, if you have access to both, you've doubled the chances this will happen in any given game. The amount of feels bad games for all of your opponents increase. So yeah, no, I don't accept that particular bit of logic. Then we have banning multiple of the most valuable cards with no warning doesn't feel stable or considerate of the experience of everyone involved, but does feel deliberately damaging to a specific audience. Also indicts Rule 0, as these were obvious cards to flag in a pregame convo. I think I've already made my point about Rule 0 fairly, concisely, but Rule 0 only works if you have a consistent play group. Rule 0 does not work when you are going to multiple different play groups who all have multiple different expectations of games. Because if somebody thinks that Mana Crypt is okay in their play group, when you sit down at their table, they are going to have that in every one of their decks. If they have one that they've shuffled proxied into all of it, or if they've just proxied a card in general, you still have to deal with the card, and nobody wants to have to sit there and go, all right, we're starting the game, get rid of your fast mana, get rid of your tutors, get rid of your this, get rid of your that. No, we just gonna want to sit down and play a game. Making the Rule 0 conversation that much smoother is actually a benefit to the game. It's not an indictment of Rule 0, it is a way to supplement Rule 0. As for the banning the most valuable cards with no warning, not feeling stable or considerate, I'm sorry, but this is the state Magic's been in since its inception. Magic the Gathering, as a card game, has constantly dealt with rotations, card bans, and market fluctuations. Looking at Magic the Gathering as an investment has been a mistake from the beginning. This is a card game, not a collector sport. There is a collectability to the cards, and that collectability should be in service to the players, not in spite of the players. This is why things like special printings for Sol Ring are perfectly okay by me. If you want to spend $400 to $1,000 on a Masterpiece Sol Ring, I'm not going to stop you. That thing's fucking cool, and I applaud you for having one if you do. But if a card like Mana Crypt is required to play at a certain power level at certain tables, then having that card be priced $200 outside of most people's reach is not okay. Sol Ring being a $1 card that everybody has access to, and Mana Crypt being a $200 card nobody has access to, you see the problem here, right? Looking at Magic the Gathering as an investment and not as a game is an issue. I think that this comes from the capitalism poisoning that we've had from a lot of our brains lately, just in general, right? The idea that every single bit of your time needs to be monopolized, or sorry, monetized. The idea that you need to be out driving for Uber or driving for Lyft or doing something to make money all the time and having no downtime ever, and everything needs to always be in service of making more money. This is a poisoned mindset. This is a mindset that is not healthy for anybody to have. And this is indicative of that. Looking at Magic not as a game to be enjoyed with your friends, but as an investment that needs to be kept track of like the stock market, that's an unhealthy thing. I don't like that aspect of the game. And I think that aspect would be better if it were tamed down. Look at games like Weiss and Pokemon, who have very, very cheap entry points for their card game because you can get every card really easily. However, there are very expensive variants for cards in both of these card games that make it way easier for collectors to find stuff that they care about a lot. The other game that is poisoned in this area for me is Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh's always been just very priced out from people being able to play if you're not constantly keeping up with it, which is an issue as well. Magic is not unique in this issue. The next one says, I feel like banning Crypt and Jeweled Lotus is a huge miss. Some people like playing high-powered Commander, and these cards are part of that. They are a Rule 0 issue, not a ban list issue, and to ban them and leave Sol Ring is nonsensical. Again, it's not nonsensical. It is triage theory. It is the idea that we can remove some of the damage And that is better towards the idea of healing than removing none of the damage. This binary mindset that it's either get rid of everything or get rid of nothing is really, really silly. It doesn't actually benefit anyone in any way. It's an argument for stagnation over anything. I would prefer us get rid of all of the things that I don't like in the game, so I personally would like it more. That's basically how every Magic player feels about every game they've ever played. But that's not how building a game for all players works. You have to figure out where that line is, and if the line is Sol Ring because of ubiquity and identity, then while I may not agree, I can at least understand that position. I don't think it's nonsensical not to ban it. I think it's perfectly reasonable given all of the information that we have here. As far as some people like playing high-powered Commander, again, there's two things that can happen here. One, if Rule 0 can be an argument for keeping these cards off of the ban list, Rule 0 can also be an argument for keeping them on the ban list. You can just as easily Rule 0 these cards into your deck as it was to Rule 0 these cards out of your deck. But because 95% of the player base do not own these cards, do not have the ability to afford these cards, it benefits 95% of the player base to not have to have that Rule 0 conversation of removing it out of the other 5% of players' decks. That 5% of the player base can have their Rule 0 conversations to put them back in. Sidebar, this is a very good reason to have a separate CEDH ban list to support that kind of play. The next one is, I feel that a bunch of sweaty nerds insisting on adding these cards to low and mid-power decks are the reason why these were banned. Their behavior warped the format, so the toys had to be taken away. Except Nadu. We all know why Nadu was banned. Yeah, Nadu was a mistake. This one I also agree with entirely. I didn't just bring posts that I disagree with. This one I agree with as well. The amount of people who want to play casual games, but also want to have their cake and eat it too by dropping a Mana Crypt in, there's not as many of them, but when you have the game with that person, it's very unfun. There are a couple of these people at shops that I've played at, and let me just say that anytime that I sit down at a table and I don't ask what kind of game we're trying to play, it's usually because I've already identified that there's a player at here who has a problem understanding deck power level, or just simply doesn't care about the kind of game everybody else wants to play. In these situations, I don't have a Rule 0 conversation. I bring down a deck that is made solely to police the table, to make sure that at least something happens that isn't somebody exploding off with a Mana Crypt into an Eldrazi turn 2 or 3, right? Like, that ends up being the way that I have to play. And it shouldn't have to be that way, right? I think letting people have those conversations is better than forcing everybody to not. So yeah, just taking these cards out and making the Rule 0 conversation be about including the cards as opposed to removing the cards, that makes infinitely more sense to me in general. Next one is whoa, Dockside, I can't say I was horribly surprised, but what a bummer. Nadu was a pain, but I don't see the huge problem. You don't see the huge problem because you didn't have 3 hours of your day taken away by the Nadu player. Anyway, but was anyone asking for Jeweled Lotus or Mana Crypt ban? This feels like a bit of a blindside, not gonna lie. So it is a blindside if you haven't been paying attention to the conversations in the Magic community for the last, I don't know, 2 years. Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt more than the other, have been huge points of conversation in this community for a long time. The fact that the Rules Committee hasn't been actively talking about these cards every week doesn't necessarily mean this is a blindside. This is a conversation that's been happening for a very, very long time. Now, that said, as for anybody asking about it, literally every month there is a should Mana Crypt be banned conversation on Twitter. I feel like you have to be under a rock to not have paid attention to any of those conversations basically ever. That's just my thought. Next one is, you just told people to only play with proxies and not ever buy cards again. I'm not going to give an opinion on that one. I'm just going to say that, as the Rules Committee is not affiliated with Wizards of the Coast officially in any legal sense, that does mean that we actually can assume that they are not in the business of selling cards for Wizards. So it's perfectly reasonable to just do proxies. Also, if you just want to play with proxies, just play with proxies. Seriously, it's cardboard at the end of the day, okay? You afford it, you buy it if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, just proxy it. It's entirely okay, okay? My opinion on games is they should be enjoyed by people, and they should not be priced out away from people. My solution to that is budget decks, but your solution could be a printer. Said this is super uncool to ban all of these at the same time with no warning. Again, no warning? How would you go about warning people about this? Just out of curiosity, right? So let's assume for a minute that the rules committee said, hey, we're thinking about banning Nadu. Wizards said they were thinking about banning Nadu. And Nadu's price dropped significantly, well before it actually got banned. It's almost as if the warning would cause the price drops as much as anything else. So if the rules committee said, hey, we're thinking about Dockside going away, we're thinking about Mana Crypt going away, that would be as much of a signal to the markets to drop the price of those cards like a rock, like a mana rock. Those prices would drop like a stone the minute that conversation happened publicly. Warning or no, it doesn't matter. The same effect would happen. Again, this should not be looked at as a consumer confidence thing, in my opinion. I think that the way this needs to be looked at is a game health thing. If you are worried about consumer confidence, then you are worried about this game as an investment. And if you are worried about this game as an investment, then I feel like you are worrying about this game in the very wrong way. I am for accessibility, and I believe you should be too. This is ridiculous. We need a separate ban list for CEDH and EDH. I agree. I 100% agree. I want CEDH players to have as much fun with this game as I have with Casual, Commander, and Brewing. I want them to be able to have all of the 15 card stacks that they want and all of the Thassa's games that are poisoned by that card that they enjoy. I want them to have the highest of high power Commander all the time. I never want to take that away from CEDH players. A separate ban list is needed. The rules committee has said that they do not regulate for CEDH, so let's go ahead and let the community regulate for CEDH, the same way the community originally regulated EDH. It's clear through their reasoning that the rules committee doesn't consider CEDH when making decisions. Yeah, they already said that. The rules committee has already said they do not consider CEDH when making decisions. CEDH is not their consideration. Also, banning Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus while leaving Mana Vault and Sol Ring alone is baffling. So this one I disagree with. Again, Sol Ring, while I agree with it should be banned for all the reasons Mana Crypt is banned, due to card identity, due to ubiquity, due to access, the card is not banned. I get that. I agree with that to a degree. And that degree is that I disagree with it, but I understand why they've made the decision. Mana Vault, on the other hand, I don't think I would ever ban. My reasoning for that is very, very simple. Mana Vault is Dark Ritual. Mana Vault is colorless Dark Ritual. You pay 1 mana, you get 3 mana out, and you do not get that 3 mana back on a subsequent turn. You cannot get that 3 mana back on a subsequent turn. The card also, without severe help, cannot go infinite with itself like a Basalt Monolith. You need to discount it by 2 for it to be able to go infinite with itself. So, all things considered, the Mana Vault is never performing the same job as a Mana Crypt. It is never performing the same job as even a Sol Ring. It is a Dark Ritual. It is a Rite of Flame. It is a card that gives you mana once, and 99% of the time, only once. Unless you go through some major hoops, like bouncing it or discounting it by 2 mana, can you get anything out of it besides just a ritual. So I don't think Mana Vault needs to be banned. Also, Mana Vault's like $30 or $40 compared to Mana Crypt, which is $200. I'm just saying, the financial part of the conversation needs to be considered as well. Access is good. These changes make the 2 best CEDH decks better, destroys a myriad of other CEDH decks, and doesn't deal with Rhystic Study, the most problematic card in CEDH tournaments. So as a CEDH player, thanks for nothing, I guess. As a casual Commander player, these rules were not made for you. Again, I do believe that we need a separate CEDH ban list to account for this. Players need to have access to these cards in CEDH. As for Rhystic Study, yeah, that card's a huge issue in CEDH tournaments. The reason that card's a problem in CEDH tournaments is CEDH tournaments go to time, or CEDH tournaments are timed. They are timed often between 50 and 70 minutes long, and Ristic Study is one of the main culprits that causes those games to go long. If you give a blue player access to their entire deck, they have the ability to create an infinitely high stack of interaction that slows the game down to just a microcosm of what it should be. It is the best blue draw in all of Commander, and if you want to help the health of CEDH, yeah, banning Ristic Study would be a way to do it. It's the same thing as getting rid of Nadu. It is a time monopolizer more than anything. Mystic Remora is an infinitely more fun version of that effect that doesn't cause the same game monopolizing effect as Ristic Study does. So yeah, I agree with this post actually, but I feel like I'm coming from a particularly different opinion than they are while still agreeing with them. I really don't understand the logic behind Lotus and Crypt, but not Vault. This ban is going to raise the price of Vault by a lot, which seems likely to eventually get banned on the same basis. Confused. So if we look at the price of Mana Vault, it looks like it peaked at around $50-ish and then dropped down to about 46, with a $55 sale happening right before the actual announcement. I don't have any data here specifically on its current pricing as of the 24th of September, but it looks like it had a small price jump of about 50 cents during the time of the announcement. Now, I do believe there is some merit to the price increase problem, however. And the reason I say that is because if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see that plenty of people are trying to sell Mana Vault for Mana Crypt prices now. Now, none of these have actually sold, okay? The last selling of this card was at $55, and that was on the 22nd of September. There have been 0 sales on the actual announcement of the card coming out, which is weird, because if you look at its history, there's usually a couple of them that sell. There's a lot of days with 0 sold, but plenty of days that have 1 sold, 3 sold, 3 sold. It's interesting to me that the day of the announcement didn't have any sales, and I think that's because multiple card shops have tried to gouge the price of Mana Vaults instantly to make up for their lost stock of Mana Vaults. Or Mana Crypts, sorry. I think long-term, though, we're not going to actually see the market continue to be this gouge where there's a 4 times multiplier on this stuff. I don't think that's going to end up being an issue. But it is an issue right now, so there actually is some legitimacy to this. Though, again, in terms of not understanding the banning of Lotus Crypt but not Vault, Vault is closer to Lotus than Crypt. Yes, I agree with that 110%. But again, Jeweled Lotus is a made-for-Commander card that's only job was to be a allegory to Black Lotus itself. That's it. I don't really like Jeweled Lotus, though, because it does come down for 0 mana, whereas at least Vault costs 1. And finally, we have this lovely post. I love how this rewards the wrong people. You just set a precedent that if you complain enough, we will ban something. Also, you rewarded people for not running interaction. Huge miss in my mind. Interaction. Why should we need interaction to deal with Mana Crypt? I'm sorry, no. Dice to removal is a dumb argument and always has been a dumb argument. And this comes from somebody who has multiple videos who has said that you need to run more interaction, showing people budget interaction they can be running in a majority of situations. All the Commander decks that I've built on this channel have between 10 to 25 interaction pieces per deck. And that's not even counting board wipes. I understand you want to have this, oh, we're just rewarding people for not running interaction conversation, but it's not the right conversation to have. Also, as this is a casual game where player feedback is an important aspect of how the game runs, yeah, of course we're going to reward people for complaining. Like, people complain, that is a form of feedback. If somebody complained during game development that something was unfun, and you fixed that aspect of the game to make it more fun for more players, would you say, oh, you're rewarding the people who complain? That doesn't make any sense. Like, no, game design is a two-way street. It is the vision of the game designer and also the experience of the game player. If the experience of the game player is routinely negative, then the game designer should do something to accommodate that. This is why cards get banned, as an example. Also, Cards get banned because game designers make mistakes. There is another aspect of this entire conversation that I want to consider, though, and this one's a little more somber, and I want you guys to give support to someone in response to this, please. So, with Jeweled Lotus being taken out of the game, the actual artist behind it, Alana Danner, did have something to say, saying, "I'm truly gutted that Jeweled Lotus was banned by MTG Commander. I have met literally thousands of players who love this card and who truly treasure it in their EDH deck. It is unfair to do it after 4 years, and now it is unplayable anywhere. If there is any reason at all to have a separate CEDH ban list, this is the one. I understand this is an emotional argument and therefore is fairly fallacious. I don't care. I think that when the artist behind the card, who everybody universally seems to have a high opinion of, points out, hey, I have had many players who have personally fond experiences with this card and come to me specifically, the card does need a home. And unlike Mana Crypt, the card doesn't have a home anymore in any real format besides Legacy. But again, it can't really work in Legacy because there's no commanders in Legacy. So that means we need a place for it to go. I think this is as good a time as any to develop a separate CEDH ban list, one that includes the Nadu ban and maybe even bans Rhystic Study to make sure that players do not have time monopolies, but also includes all of this fast mana for the high-powered games those players want. If anything, do it for the artist behind Jeweled Lotus, who has had plenty of positive experiences with the Magic community on large that really, really love her contribution to Magic the Gathering. I don't think that it's a good argument that the card's been around for 4 years and now it's gone. I think that the card probably shouldn't have been designed in the first place. But the card was made, Pandora's box was opened, and there does need to be a home for it. And I think that home is CEDH. That said, I do want to go ahead and throw this to all of you for conversation and discussion. I'm sure each and every one of you have a lot of opinions about these cards and how their bannings have affected you personally. I think I've given pretty much everything I possibly can in terms of my own opinion on this, and I'm sorry this video ended up going as long as it did, but I wanted to be thorough, and I wanted to cover all of my bases, and I wanted to cover a lot of community feedback on top of my own opinions about the arguments. So, yeah. I'm happy these cards are banned, but I think CEDH needs its own ban list now. I think these cards need a home, and I think that home is competitive Commander. Let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravelern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.